A Werewolf Shifter Romance, penned by Amelia Hart. Chapter 1. The Incorrect Connection. The sterile treatment room felt stifling as Sophie Carter toiled alone beneath the harsh illumination of the overhead lights. A German shepherd lay inert on the metallic slab, its chest rising and falling with shallow, erratic breaths that tightened her stomach with apprehension. Dark saturation had already permeated the emergency dressing she had hastily applied, and despite her most dedicated efforts, the hemorrhage showed no inclination to cease. Sophie's fingers located the canine's pulse point, counting the rapid, faint beats. As her thoughts churned through remedial measures she lacked the authorization to implement. "Easy, fellow," she murmured, her voice gentle, notwithstanding the unease gnawing at her core. "We're going to see you through this." The dog's eyes, veiled with discomfort, met her gaze with a brand of devotion that ached her heart. She had always possessed this peculiar effect on animals. They seemed to perceive something within her that even she could not comprehend. Dr. Reed termed it a talent, but at this moment it felt more like an encumbrance, as she observed the shepherd struggling for each respiration. At 24 years of age, Sophie had encountered her share of critical cases, but this night felt distinct. The German shepherd had been delivered by an agitated proprietor shortly after closing, struck by a vehicle that had made no attempt to stop. The impact had inflicted deep lacerations across its flank, and what she suspected to be internal bleeding. Without appropriate surgical apparatus and Dr. Reed's proficiency, she was engaged in a losing conflict. The clinic was eerily silent at 11:30 at night. Dr. Reed had departed 3 hours prior, muttering something regarding his grandson's birthday celebration, leaving Sophie isolated with the urgent cases. She did not object. Typically, the seclusion afforded her space for contemplation, to concentrate on recovery without the pressure of watchful gazes. But tonight, every shadow seemed to harbor enigmas, and every sound startled her. Sophie had been employed at Riverside Veterinary Clinic for 2 years, ever since she had commenced her veterinary studies. The remuneration was meager, but Dr. Reed permitted her to manage actual cases instead of merely cleaning enclosures, unlike other part-time vocations. She required the practical experience, and more significantly, she required the financial resources. Her modest dwelling above the laundry facility barely qualified as shelter, but it was all she could manage on her earnings and student obligations. Her mobile device lay lifeless on the surface, its darkened screen mirroring her worried countenance. She had been so engrossed in the injured canine that she had neglected to charge it, and now the accumulator had completely depleted. The landline rested on Dr. Reed's desk across the room, but she had to act swiftly. The dog's respiration was becoming progressively shallower, and she could observe its gums turning pallid, a clear indicator of impending shock. "Confound it," she uttered, grasping the phone and dialing what she believed to be Dr. Reed's digits. Her digits, slick with anxious perspiration, fumbled across the keys in the dim illumination. The overhead lamp had expired an hour ago, leaving only the examination light to work by. She had intended to replace it, but there never seemed to be sufficient time for upkeep when creatures were perishing. The phone rang once, twice, thrice. Sophie tapped her foot impatiently, glancing back at the German shepherd. Its eyes were beginning to cloud over, and panic shot through her like frigid water. She had lost her composure before. It was an inherent component of veterinary practice, but never due to her inability to summon assistance promptly. Finally, someone responded. "Hello?" The voice was aberrant, excessively deep, excessively authoritative. Certainly not Dr. Reed's accustomed hoarseness, but desperation compelled her to proceed. She could not disconnect and squander precious moments dialing again. Dr. Reed. Thank heavens. She inhaled into the phone. "The German shepherd is deteriorating. I require you here immediately. The hemorrhaging persists, and it is succumbing to shock. I have executed all within my capacity, but it is insufficient. Its respiration is shallow. Its temperature is plummeting, and I suspect internal damage. Please, I implore your assistance." Silence stretched across the line, weighty and peculiar. Sophie could discern her own pulse in her ears. She could detect the odor of the disinfectant that never quite masked the underlying scent of dread and suffering that permeated every veterinary clinic. The stillness felt aberrant, charged with something she could not identify. "Where are you?" The voice was precise, commanding, undoubtedly not Dr. Reed. Sophie's blood chilled. She had dialed incorrectly. In her panic and weariness, she had intermingled the digits. Heat flooded her cheeks as mortification battled with despair. This was precisely the sort of error she could not afford to commit. "I apologize," she stammered. "I must have misdialed. I assumed you were someone else. I was attempting to contact my mentor regarding a critical medical situation." "The location," the voice reiterated, and something in its cadence made her spine stiffen. It was not a query, it was an imperative issued with the type of authority that anticipated immediate adherence. Sophie surveyed the empty clinic, suddenly cognizant of her isolation. The parking area outside was dim, the streetlights casting elongated shadows between the edifices. Her dilapidated Honda sat solitary beneath the flickering security illumination, and beyond that, nothing but darkness extending toward the industrial zone. Anyone could be out there observing, anticipating. "I cannot disclose that to you," she stated, endeavoring to inject resolve into her tone. "I have no notion who you are. This was an oversight. You stated the German Shepherd was in extremis." The stranger's voice was placid now, almost gentle, but beneath the mildness lay steel. "You require assistance." Sophie glanced back at the canine, whose respiration had become even more labored. Its tongue protruded, pink froth gathering at the edges of its maw. She was losing it, and Dr. Reed still was not answering his phone. She had attempted his number 3 times in the preceding hour, reaching only voicemail on each occasion. Her hands clenched around the receiver as she confronted an insurmountable dilemma. There was something in the stranger's intonation, a certainty that implied he comprehended precisely the kind of aid she required. Perhaps he was a veterinarian, too, someone who grasped the desperation of witnessing a life ebb away. Perhaps the cosmos had connected her to precisely the individual who could preserve this dog's existence. "Riverside Veterinary Clinic," she heard herself articulate on Maple Street, just beyond the venerable courthouse. "But I must caution you, I am alerting the authorities if you are not who you profess to be." The line went silent. Sophie gazed at the device in her hand, her heart thudding against her ribs. What had she just done? She had divulged her whereabouts to an utter stranger, someone who had responded to an incorrect connection and somehow persuaded her to confide in him information that could place her in grave peril. But the German shepherd's labored respiration reminded her why she had assumed the risk. She returned to the examination slab, placing her hands delicately on the canine's flank. Its respiration was shallow, rapid, its body temperature declining despite the warming blanket she had enveloped it in. She possessed perhaps 20 minutes before she lost it entirely. Outside, she discerned the sound of engines. Not merely one automobile, but several, their headlights piercing the gloom as they maneuvered into the clinic's parking area. Sophie's mouth went dry as she observed through the pane. 3 dark SUVs arranged themselves in the parking lot like chess pieces, their darkened windows revealing nothing of their occupants. This was not Dr. Reed. This was something else entirely. The engines ceased in perfect synchrony, and Sophie watched as figures emerged from the vehicles. Even in the subdued illumination, she could perceive they moved with predatory elegance, their stances alert and prepared. These were not veterinarians arriving to assist with an emergency. These were something considerably more perilous. Sophie's hands found the German shepherd's head, caressing its ears as she whispered assurances that she did not experience whatever was imminent. She would not abandon the creature that had entrusted its life to her. The clinic door's bell chimed as someone entered. Chapter 2. Perilous Strangers. The man who entered the clinic moved with the fluid assurance of one accustomed to commanding spaces. Sophie's breath hitched as she took in his imposing stature. Easily 6 feet 2 inches with broad shoulders that filled out his dark jacket impeccably. His black hair was cropped short, professional, but there was nothing soft about the sharp contours of his visage, or the manner in which his nearly black eyes scanned the clinic with predatory appraisal. Behind him came 4 other individuals, each radiating the same controlled menace. They were not ruffians or common offenders. Their costly attire and synchronized movements suggested something far more refined. Sophie's grip tightened on the examination slab as they dispersed throughout the confined area, their gazes cataloging egress points and potential threats with martial exactitude. "You are not Dr. Reed," Sophie declared, proud that her voice remained steady despite the dread clawing at her throat. The leader's gaze found hers, and she felt ensnared like a butterfly beneath glass. "No," he concurred, his voice the identical deep baritone that had commanded her location over the telephone. "I am someone who received your communication regarding an emergency." "What sort of veterinarians travel in a convoy?" Sophie demanded, positioning herself protectively between the strangers and the injured German shepherd. "Who are you people?" Instead of responding, the man approached the examination slab with deliberate steps, his attention shifting to the dying dog. Something in his expression softened as he observed the animal's condition. The shallow breathing, the blood-soaked dressings, the glazed eyes that spoke of approaching demise. "What occurred to him?" he inquired, and Sophie was astonished by the genuine concern in his voice. "Hit and run," she replied instinctively, then corrected herself. "Not that it is any of your concern. I posed a question to you." The man's lips curved into what might have been a smile. "My designation is Caspian Cross. I manage a specialized veterinary practice. When I received your call, I surmised one of my patients was in jeopardy." "Specialized how?" Sophie's eyes narrowed. "And why do you require bodyguards for house calls?" "I deal with challenging cases," Caspian stated smoothly. "Animals that others have relinquished. As for security, you would be astonished how emotionally people react when their companions are involved." It was a plausible justification, but something in his tone implied layers of meaning she was not privy to. Sophie scrutinized his countenance, searching for telltale signs of deceit. Her father had been a con artist prior to his passing, and she had learned to discern individuals' falsehoods in the subtle tightening around their eyes, the way their shoulders tensed when they fabricated narratives. Caspian Cross was concealing something, but she could not detect overt deception, more akin to him presenting a version of the truth edited for her comprehension. "The dog is succumbing," she stated bluntly. "If you are genuinely a veterinarian, demonstrate it." Without hesitation, Caspian rolled up his sleeves and proceeded to the sink, washing his hands with the practiced economy of someone who had performed the action thousands of times. Sophie observed as he examined the German shepherd with gentle yet thorough hands, his fingers finding pressure points she had overlooked, his eyes identifying symptoms she had missed. "A collapsed lung," he murmured, more to himself than to her, likely from the impact. "That explains the labored respiration." Sophie's heart sank. "I do not possess the equipment for thoracic surgery. He is going to perish, is he not? Not if we act swiftly." Caspian's hands moved with surprising tenderness as he stroked the dog's head. "I require you to hold him steady. Can you accomplish that?" "Of course, but trust me," Caspian interrupted, and something in his eyes made her believe him, notwithstanding every rational instinct screaming warnings. What ensued was the most engrossing 20 minutes of Sophie's existence. Caspian worked with instruments from a medical kit one of his men produced, his hands steady and assured as he performed emergency procedures that would have challenged a board-certified veterinary surgeon. Sophie found herself assisting almost reflexively, her body responding to his quiet directives before her mind could process them. "Apply pressure here," he instructed, guiding her hands to the correct position. "Do you feel that? The lung is reinflating." The instant their fingers connected, Sophie perceived something akin to an electrical jolt race up her arm. Caspian's hands stilled for merely a heartbeat, his eyes flicking to hers with an expression she could not decipher. The atmosphere between them seemed to intensify, charged with something unrelated to the medical crisis. "Concentrate," he stated softly, but his voice had roughened slightly. Sophie nodded, endeavoring to disregard the way her pulse had accelerated. This was not the opportune moment for whatever peculiar attraction was sparking between them. The German shepherd's life hung in the balance. Under Caspian's direction, They stabilized the dog's respiration and halted the internal bleeding. Sophie observed with astonishment as the animal's color improved, its breathing becoming deeper and more regular. It was akin to witnessing a miracle unfold. "How did you discern?" she inquired as they tidied up. "About the collapsed lung. I have been pursuing veterinary studies for 3 years, and I completely missed it." "Experience?" Caspian responded, but there was something evasive in his tone. "I have witnessed comparable injuries previously in canines." His pause was almost imperceptible amongst other animals. Sophie sensed there was more to that narrative, but the German Shepherd chose that precise instant to lift its head and regard her with clear, alert eyes. The improvement was remarkable, almost supernaturally swift. "He will be well," Caspian stated, stroking the dog's ears. "Full recuperation, likely within a week." "A week?" Sophie stared at him. Injuries of this magnitude typically require months for complete healing. "Some creatures are more resilient than others," Caspian remarked. And once again, she felt as though he were speaking in code. As if summoned by an unseen signal, Caspian's associates began to move toward the exit. The leader himself withdrew from the examination slab, his professional facade reasserting itself. "Wait," Sophie called out. "I need to ascertain how to contact you for subsequent care or if complications arise." Caspian withdrew a business card from his jacket and placed it on the counter. Sophie glanced at it. Expensive stationery, raised lettering, but containing only a name and a telephone number, no business address, no accreditations, no indication of the nature of his practice. "If you require anything," he stated, "dial that number." "What about remuneration?" Sophie inquired. "You have just preserved this dog's existence. I am indebted to you in some manner." "Consider it a professional courtesy," Caspian replied, but his gaze lingered on her face with an intensity that warmed her skin. "Though I would advise exercising greater caution when walking alone at night." "This is not the most secure vicinity. I have been employed here for 2 years," Sophie retorted defensively. "I am capable of looking after myself." "I am certain you are." Caspian's smile was enigmatic, but certain dangers are more elusive to detect than others. Before Sophie could inquire what he implied, he was moving toward the exit with that same predatory grace. His associates assumed formation around him, and within moments the clinic was deserted, save for Sophie and the recuperating German Shepherd. Sophie stood in the sudden quiet, attempting to process what had transpired. A stranger had answered her incorrect call, brought a retinue of men who moved like soldiers, performed veterinary surgery with techniques she had never witnessed, and then vanished into the night like a phantasm. She picked up his business card, running her thumb over the raised lettering, Caspian Cross. The appellation felt familiar on her tongue, though she was certain they had never previously encountered. There was something about him that resonated with her, something that prompted her to place faith in him. Notwithstanding every red flag her rational mind was signaling, the German Shepherd whimpered softly, drawing her attention back to the present. Its eyes were bright and alert, its respiration normal. By all logical accounts, it should still be fighting for its life, but instead, it appeared ready to leap from the slab and run around the parking lot. Sophie's phone buzzed with a text message. She had plugged it in while Caspian worked, and now it displayed several missed calls from Dr. Reed. "Apologies, youngster," his voicemail stated. "Family emergency extended longer than anticipated. How is our 4-legged patient?" Sophie stared at her phone, then at the business card, then at the miraculously recovered dog. How was she supposed to explain any of this to Dr. Reed? How could she inform him that a mysterious stranger with no credentials had performed emergency surgery in their clinic and then disappeared without a trace? Outside, she heard a car engine igniting. Sophie hurried to the window, just in time to see a solitary black sedan pulling away from the curb across the street. Had someone been observing the clinic? Observing her? Caspian's words echoed in her mind. Some dangers are more elusive to detect than others. What had she implicated herself in? Chapter 3. Obscurity and Wolves. 3 days elapsed since the enigmatic encounter at the clinic, and Sophie could not dislodge the sensation that her world had been irrevocably altered. The German Shepherd, whom she had begun to call Max, had achieved a complete recovery that defied every tenet of veterinary science she had acquired. Dr. Reed was astonished by the animal's progress, conducting supplementary examinations that revealed no trace of the severe injuries that had nearly cost him his life. "I have never witnessed anything comparable," Dr. Reed mused, studying Max's most recent x-rays. "It is as though the trauma never occurred. The lung tissue exhibits no scarring, no indication of recent intervention. Are you absolutely certain regarding the initial diagnosis?" Sophie nodded, though doubt crept into her voice. "He was dying, Dr. Reed. A collapsed lung, internal bleeding, symptoms of shock. I documented everything." But when she had searched for her notes from that evening, they were nowhere to be found. The examination forms she had completed had vanished, along with any physical evidence of Max's original state. It was as though someone had deliberately erased all proof of what had transpired. More unsettling than the missing documentation was what Sophie had begun to observe around town. Automobiles that materialized wherever she went, distinct vehicles, but always with darkened windows that prevented her from discerning their occupants. A man in a coffee shop who departed immediately upon her arrival. The sensation of being watched that prickled along her spine every time she walked to her vehicle. Initially, she dismissed it as paranoia, a consequence of the strain from that night. But the feeling persisted, growing stronger with each passing day. Someone was unequivocally monitoring her movements. Sophie had attempted to research Caspian Cross online, but found only scant information. A few business directories for Cross Industries, a prosperous consulting enterprise with offices in 3 major cities, some philanthropic photographs depicting him at fundraising functions, perpetually impeccably attired and surrounded by society's luminaries. Nothing that explained his veterinary expertise or his modest army of bodyguards. The business card he had left contained only his name and a telephone number. She had retrieved it a dozen times, her thumb hovering over her phone's keypad, but something always deterred her from calling. What would she articulate? "Thank you for saving a dog's life with improbable healing methodologies. Kindly elucidate why I perceive myself to be under surveillance." Thursday evening found Sophie departing campus later than usual, her mind alight with information from her advanced animal physiology lecture. Professor Martinez had extensively detailed regenerative healing across a spectrum of creatures, recounting instances where animals had survived injuries that logically should have been fatal. The echoes of these cases in Max's recovery were deeply disturbing. The university's parking structure was almost entirely devoid of vehicles. The vast majority of scholars had departed, either for weekend excursions or their part-time employment. Sophie's modest Honda was positioned beneath a faulty illumination source that cast sporadic, dancing shadows across the paved ground. She had consistently utilized this very parking bay for 3 consecutive years without any issues. However, this particular evening, a palpable sense of unease permeated the atmosphere. 2 individuals materialized from the obscurity behind a van parked a mere 3 spaces away. Their movements were deliberate, their focus solely fixed upon her. Sophie's grip tightened around her keyring. This was a conditioned reflex, stemming from a self-defense course she had attended, guiding her to position the longest key between her knuckles. "Sophie Carter?" the taller of the 2 men inquired, his smile unnervingly wide and excessively rehearsed. "And who might be asking?" she countered, subtly retreating towards the better illuminated vicinity bordering the science building. "We are investigators," the second man stated, revealing a wallet that he flashed too swiftly for her to discern any details. "We require your cooperation to address certain inquiries regarding the occurrence at your place of work 3 nights ago." "What occurrence?" Sophie's pulse quickened, yet she maintained an even tone. Nothing untoward had transpired at the clinic. "Come now, Miss Carter," the first man interjected, positioning himself to obstruct her escape route. "We are aware of your recent guests, the gentlemen arriving in the opulent vehicles." Sophie's thoughts raced. What interest could they possibly have in me? These men were not law enforcement. Their attire was of inferior quality, their identification badges conveniently brief. Nevertheless, they demonstrated knowledge of Caspian and his entourage, indicating they had been observing that night. "I have no idea what you are referring to," she declared, continuing her measured retreat, "and I am not obligated to answer your questions without proper credentials." The two men exchanged significant glances, and Sophie observed the precise moment they abandoned their pretense. The taller individual reached inside his jacket, while his associate advanced to flank her. "I believe you do know," he asserted, his voice devoid of its prior manufactured affability, "and I suspect you will divulge everything." Sophie spun around and fled. Behind her, she heard curses and the heavy thud of pursuit. The science building, a mere 50 yards distant, had its doors secured after 8 o'clock in the evening. Her vehicle was closer, but she doubted she could unlock it and initiate the engine before they apprehended her. A wave of panic washed over her as the stark reality of her isolation became apparent. Then a sound froze her blood. A deep, resonant growl emanated from all directions simultaneously. The pursuit behind her halted abruptly. Sophie whirled around to witness her pursuers recoiling from the shadowed alcove between two parked cars, their faces contorted with terror. The growling intensified, and colossal forms began to emerge from the encroaching darkness. Wolves. 3 of them, each possessing a size far exceeding that of any wild creature. Their pelts were so profoundly dark they seemed to absorb all ambient light, and their eyes blazed with an intelligence that was unsettlingly human. They moved with synchronized precision, positioning themselves between Sophie and the 2 terrified men. "What in the actual hell?" one of the men stammered, his hand trembling as he reached inside his coat. The largest wolf bared its lips, revealing canines that gleamed like polished ivory daggers. The sound it produced bore no resemblance to the mournful howls Sophie had previously encountered in nature documentaries. This was a stark declaration of impending violence, a primal warning that transcended the boundaries of species. Both men turned and fled, their haste evident as they stumbled over each other in their desperate scramble for their van. The engine roared to life, and they careened out of the parking lot, tires screeching, leaving Sophie alone with 3 immense predators. Sophie should have been consumed by terror. Every instinct should have been screaming at her to flee, to seek refuge, to summon assistance. Instead, she found herself captivated, observing the eyes of the largest wolf. They were a profound shade of blue, nearly black, and carried an ache of familiarity. "Caspian," she whispered. The wolf's ears perked forward, and a flicker of what appeared to be surprise crossed its features. For a brief interval, the 3 animals remained motionless, as if her recognition had fundamentally altered some unseen equation. Then, the shadows between the vehicles shimmered, and in the space where wolves had stood, 3 men now awaited. Sophie's mind struggled to reconcile the spectacle she had just witnessed. Logic warred, with the undeniable evidence presented before her. Caspian stepped into the light, fully human, yet retaining that same inherent predatory grace. His attire was dark and impeccably tailored, without a single wrinkle to suggest a recent transformation from another form. "Are you injured?" he inquired, his voice carrying the same authoritative resonance she recalled from the clinic. Sophie's voice failed her as she attempted to articulate the sheer impossibility of what she had just observed. "You're not human." "No," Caspian confirmed with simple directness. "I am not." The casual admission struck her with the force of a physical blow. Her entire perception of reality had been irrevocably shattered. Shapeshifters were real. The individual who had saved Max's life was a being straight out of folklore and terrifying tales. "What exactly are you?" she managed to ask. "We identify ourselves as shifters," Caspian explained, approaching her with cautious, measured steps, akin to someone nearing a skittish animal. "We coexist with humanity, though our preference is to remain concealed." "Those men," Sophie stated, gesturing towards the direction the van had vanished, "they knew about you." "They were inquiring about that night at the clinic." Caspian's expression darkened. "What did you tell them?" Nothing. I genuinely had no understanding of their queries, Sophie replied, drawing her arms around herself, a sudden chill descending despite the mild evening. How did they know? How did they locate me? Because you were observed in my company, Caspian stated, a subtle undertone of regret coloring his voice. Association with my kind places you in jeopardy from those who would exploit such knowledge for their own agendas. What sort of agendas? Instead of directly addressing her question, Caspian produced his mobile device and spoke in low, urgent tones to someone on the line. Sophie caught fragmented phrases. Compromise imminent. Expedited extraction required. Double the perimeter. This elicited a clenching sensation in her stomach, a fresh wave of apprehension. We must relocate you to a secure environment, he announced, concluding the call. Safe from what? Sophie demanded. I cannot comprehend any of this. 3 days ago, you performed a life-saving act for a dog. Now you claim to be some kind of werewolf, and individuals are pursuing me simply because I witnessed it. The situation is considerably more complex than that, Caspian carefully elucidated. However, essentially, there exist factions within the human population aware of our existence. Some aim to study us, others to subjugate us, and a select few harbor the intent to eradicate us entirely. Your presence with me has placed you on their observable spectrum. Sophie emitted a sharp, almost hysterical laugh. This is utterly absurd. I am a veterinary student. My concerns revolve around exam preparation and meeting my rent obligations. I do not engage with clandestine organizations or beings capable of shifting form. You do now, Caspian stated gently. I apologize, Sophie. Had I foreseen that particular communication would place you at risk, I would have sought an alternative method to render aid that night. Seek another way to assist. You answered a misdirected call. No, Caspian corrected, his gaze meeting hers. I responded to precisely the call I was destined to receive. Before Sophie could inquire about his meaning, the faint sound of approaching engines echoed across the expanse of the parking lot. Multiple vehicles were advancing at considerable speed. Are those your associates? She inquired. Caspian's countenance was grim as he meticulously counted the approaching lights. No, and our time has elapsed. Chapter 4. Sanctuary Amidst the Peaks. The assault commenced with savage swiftness. Dark-colored SUVs converged upon the parking lot from 3 distinct vectors, their powerful headlamps piercing the nocturnal gloom like relentless searchlights. Individuals disembarked from the vehicles before they had even fully halted, exhibiting a military-grade precision that sent a chill of dread through Sophie. Down! Caspian commanded, his hand finding the small of her back and propelling her behind a sturdy concrete pillar. Sophie crouched in the shadows, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs as she observed Caspian and his 2 companions transition into their lupine forms with astonishing fluidity. The metamorphosis was both mesmerizing and profoundly terrifying. Bones elongated, muscles rippled, human features contorted, and melted into something primal and formidable. Within mere seconds, 3 colossal wolves stood where human beings had been moments prior. The ensuing conflict was unlike anything Sophie could have ever conceived. The wolves moved with the swiftness of liquid darkness, launching attacks from multiple vantage points with a coordinated ferocity that bespoke years of shared combat experience. However, their adversaries were evidently prepared for encounters with supernatural entities, wielding weaponry that crackled with electrical energy and discharged projectiles tipped with silver. Tranquilizers, Sophie overheard one of the assailants exclaim. We need them alive. The largest wolf, identified as Caspian, executed a powerful leap over an automobile, bringing down 2 attackers simultaneously with a force that defied the laws of physics. Yet, even as he engaged in combat, Sophie could discern that they were significantly outnumbered. Additional vehicles were arriving, disgorging fresh waves of reinforcements. A tranquilizer dart struck one of Caspian's companions in the shoulder. The wolf faltered, its movements becoming noticeably sluggish as the potent sedative took effect. A pained howl emanating from Caspian reverberated across the parking lot as he desperately attempted to reach his incapacitated pack member. Sophie could not simply remain a passive observer. These creatures, these men, were engaged in a desperate struggle to safeguard her, and one of them was on the verge of capture due to this very act. Acting on pure instinct, she snatched her car keys and sprinted towards her Honda. "Sophie, no!" Caspian's voice, even in his wolf form, resonated with an urgency that struck her mind as a psychic projection, startling in its clarity. But she was already behind the wheel, the engine roaring to life. Sophie had spent her formative years in the foster care system, moving between families who viewed her as either a burden or a source of financial gain. She had acquired the skill of driving at the tender age of 13, surreptitiously commandeering her foster father's truck to evade his unwanted advances. Evading law enforcement through a labyrinth of back roads had instilled in her a set of abilities she had never anticipated needing again. She slammed the accelerator, her Honda accelerating towards the attacker's vehicles with the velocity of a missile. The element of surprise granted her precious moments as the men scrambled for cover. Sophie wrenched the steering wheel sharply to the right, her car skidding sideways, impacting two of the SUVs with enough force to crumple their front ends. This unexpected diversion provided Caspian with the critical opening he required. He bounded towards his injured comrade, seizing the tranquilized wolf by the scruff of its neck and dragging him towards the concealment of the shadows. The third member of their group provided vital cover, his guttural snarls and snapping jaws effectively deterring the attackers. "This way." Caspian had reverted to his human form, his voice laced with urgency as he beckoned Sophie from behind the science building. Sophie abandoned her now ruined automobile and sprinted towards him, adrenaline surging through her, sharpening her movements to a keen precision. Behind her, shouts erupted as their assailants regrouped, but Caspian was already guiding her into the wooded expanse bordering the campus. They traversed the darkness for what felt like an eternity, navigating paths Sophie had never known existed. Caspian moved with the innate confidence of someone intimately familiar with every tree and stone, while his companions flanked them in their wolf forms, their ears constantly swiveling, attuned to any sounds of pursuit. When they finally came to a halt, Sophie's lungs burned and her legs trembled with profound exhaustion. They stood in a clearing where a sleek black helicopter awaited, its rotors already spinning. The pilot appeared to be another of Caspian's associates, alert, professional, and possessing an aura of latent danger. "Where are we going?" Sophie yelled above the deafening roar of the engines. "Somewhere safe," Caspian replied, assisting her into the aircraft. "Somewhere they cannot reach you." The helicopter ascended into the night sky, carrying Sophie away from the familiar world she knew. Below, the city lights diminished, eventually transforming into scattered pinpricks of light against the vast darkness. She pressed her face against the window pane, watching her former life recede into the distance. Caspian sat opposite her, his expression somber as he spoke into a radio headset. Even without comprehending the dialogue, Sophie could discern that the news was unfavorable. His jaw tightened with each exchange, and the knuckles of his hand gripping the armrest turned white. After a flight duration of approximately 40 minutes, they descended towards a secluded compound nestled within what appeared to be pristine, untamed wilderness. Sophie could discern various structures arranged around a central courtyard, their architectural design harmonizing seamlessly with the surrounding forest. Security lighting illuminated defensive emplacements that spoke of extensive preparation for precisely such a contingency. The helicopter settled onto a landing platform meticulously carved from indigenous stone. As the rotors gradually decelerated, Sophie found herself enveloped by a gathering of Caspian's people. They moved with the same innate predatory grace she was beginning to associate with shifters, their eyes reflecting an inner luminescence that distinguished them as something beyond the ordinary human spectrum. "Welcome to Raven's Ridge," Caspian announced, extending his hand to assist her from the aircraft. "This is the heart of my territory." Sophie accepted his assistance, though the contact sent that familiar electric sensation surging up her arm. "Your territory? Am I what our kind refers to as an alpha?" Caspian elaborated as they proceeded towards the primary edifice. I lead the shifter community residing along the western seaboard. This compound functions as our central hub and sanctuary. The interior of the main building exuded an unexpected warmth and comfort. Stone walls were softened by opulent tapestries and thoughtfully selected works of art. A colossal fireplace dominated one wall, its flames casting an ethereal, dancing glow across plush leather furnishings that appeared both expensive and well-worn. "You must be utterly exhausted," Caspian remarked, his formal demeanor contrasting with the intimate ambiance. "Owen will escort you to your quarters. We can converse further in the morning, once you've had ample time to process these recent events." A man stepped forward, tall, with dark hair, and possessing that same predatory elegance as the others, though his eyes conveyed a greater warmth. "I am Owen Cross," he introduced himself with a slight smile, "Caspian's brother and second in command. Allow me to facilitate your settling in." Sophie followed Owen through corridors adorned with numerous photographs chronicling the compound's history. She caught glimpses of Caspian in many of them, sometimes in formal settings alongside other serious-looking individuals, other times in candid shots with what were clearly members of his pack. In every depiction, he exuded an intrinsic authority, the natural bearing of someone destined to lead. The guest room Owen guided her to was more opulent than any hotel Sophie had ever encountered. A king-sized bed occupied the center of the space, while floor-to-ceiling windows offered panoramic views of the surrounding forest. A fireplace had already been kindled, casting a warm luminescence across polished wooden floors, which were generously covered with thick, luxurious rugs. "The bathroom is through there," Owen indicated, gesturing towards a doorway. "You will find attire in the wardrobe. We maintain a selection of garments in various sizes to accommodate unforeseen circumstances such as this. Should you require anything further, do not hesitate to utilize the telephone. Our culinary staff is capable of preparing any meal you desire." "Situations like this," Sophie questioned, a note of incredulity in her voice, "do you frequently rescue individuals from shadowy governmental organizations?" Owen's smile held a knowing glint. "More often than we would prefer. The human world is not as distinct from ours as the majority of individuals believe. There are invariably those who seek to exploit any perceived connection. What is it they desire from me? I am of no particular significance." "You were observed in the company of our Alpha," Owen stated matter-of-factly. "That, by association, renders you significant." And he paused, his gaze intently studying her face with an intensity that made her feel unsettled. "There may be more to your situation than meets the eye. Caspian will provide further explanation when he deems you prepared." After Owen departed, Sophie stood alone in the sumptuously appointed room, attempting to process the extraordinary events of the preceding hours. Earlier that morning, her most pressing concern had been an impending midterm examination in comparative anatomy. Now she found herself a guest, or perhaps a captive, within a stronghold of the supernatural, shielded by beings that defied the natural order, from adversaries she could not comprehend. She approached the windows, gazing out at the vast forest that stretched towards the distant horizon. Somewhere within those dense trees, she knew, patrols of shifter guards maintained vigilant watch for any encroaching threats. The notion should have been reassuring, yet it only served to underscore the profound and complete alteration of her world. A soft, rhythmic knocking at the door interrupted her reverie. Sophie turned to observe a young woman entering, carrying a tea service, her movements possessing a graceful, almost silent fluidity. "I am Luna," she announced with a warm, inviting smile. "I thought you might benefit from something to aid your sleep." "Thank you," Sophie replied, accepting the steaming cup. The tea possessed an aroma of herbs she could not identify, yet it emanated an immediate sense of tranquility. "May I ask you something?" "Of course." "Are you like them? A shifter?" Luna nodded affirmatively. "The majority of us here are. This compound houses approximately 200 pack members and their families. We are not solely warriors. We are educators, medical practitioners, engineers, and artists. We lead fulfilling lives, simply concealed from the human world. Why maintain secrecy? If there are so many of you, why not simply reveal yourselves? Luna's expression softened, tinged with sadness. Because humans fear what they do not understand. History is replete with accounts of the consequences when they encounter something different. We have learned that survival hinges upon discretion. After Luna departed, Sophie sipped the herbal infusion, attempting to bring order to her perplexing circumstances. She was secure yet confined, protected yet utterly isolated from everything she had ever known. And at the very core of this unprecedented situation was Caspian Cross, the enigmatic alpha who had responded to her desperate plea and irrevocably reshaped the trajectory of her existence. Through her window, she could discern moving lights within the forest, the patrols Owen had alluded to. Her protectors were actively engaged in maintaining vigilance throughout the night. However, as sleep finally began to claim her, Sophie could not entirely dismiss the pervasive sensation that she was no longer Sophie Carter, the veterinary student and unremarkable individual from a small town. She had become something else entirely, though the exact nature of that transformation remained elusive. Chapter 5. Concealed Lineage. Sophie awoke to sunlight filtering through unfamiliar windows and the faint murmur of voices carried on the mountain air. For a brief moment she remained still, clinging to the hope that the preceding night's events had been nothing more than a particularly vivid nightmare. Yet, the luxurious bedding and the expansive forest vista visible beyond the glass panes served as undeniable confirmation that her reality had indeed been profoundly altered. A gentle tap at her door interrupted her disorientation. "Sophie, it's Luna. I've brought breakfast." The young shifter entered with a tray laden with items that smelled heavenly: fresh coffee, warm pastries, and what appeared to be homemade preserves. She placed it upon a small table positioned by the windows, her movements imbued with that same fluid grace Sophie was beginning to associate with Caspian's people. "How did you sleep?" Luna inquired, drawing back the heavy curtains to reveal a breathtaking panorama of the mountain valley. "Better than I had anticipated," Sophie admitted, wrapping herself in the silken robe she had discovered hanging in the bathroom. "Though I confess, I keep expecting to wake up and realize this was all merely a figment of my imagination." Luna's smile conveyed understanding. "The initial encounter with our world is invariably overwhelming. You are navigating it with remarkable resilience." "Are you certain?" Sophie questioned, her voice laced with self-doubt. "Because I feel as though I am barely maintaining equilibrium." "Trust me, you are performing admirably. I have witnessed individuals discover our existence previously, and most succumb to either catatonia or extreme hysteria. You actively defended yourself last night. That demonstrates considerable fortitude." Sophie sipped the coffee, which possessed a flavor far superior to anything she had ever tasted, and studied Luna's face. The young woman could not have been significantly older than herself, yet her eyes held a profound wisdom that spoke of experiences far exceeding her apparent age. "How long have you resided here?" Sophie inquired. "My entire life. I was born at Raven's Ridge," Luna responded, settling into a chair opposite Sophie. "My parents were integral members of Caspian's father's pack. When the previous alpha passed away and Caspian assumed leadership, very little changed for those of us who grew up within these environs. This has always been our home." "What became of his father?" Luna's expression grew somber. "He was murdered, alongside his mother. Caspian was merely 22 years of age when he inherited the leadership of 12 distinct pack territories. The majority of individuals perceived him as too young, too inexperienced. He has spent the past 7 years assiduously disproving those assumptions." Sophie felt an unexpected surge of empathy. She understood intimately what it meant to lose one's parents at a tender age, to be compelled to navigate the complexities of life without the guidance of those who were meant to be your anchors. "I am truly sorry," she said softly. "I can relate to that feeling. You also experienced the loss of your parents. When I was 16, a car accident claimed them, or at least, that's the story I was given." Sophie paused, setting her teacup down, taken aback by the unexpected ease of conversation with Luna. I bounced between foster families until I was legally an adult. It's not quite the same as being thrust into the role of a supernatural leader, but grief is grief, Luna added softly. And Caspian would understand that more than most people. He's drawn to individuals who endure hardship and emerge stronger. Before Sophie could inquire about the meaning of her words, another distinct rap sounded on the door. This time, it was Owen, his expression grave as he entered. "My apologies for the intrusion," he stated, "but Caspian requires your presence. We've encountered some developments overnight." Sophie's stomach twisted with apprehension. "What sort of developments?" "The kind best discussed in a more private setting," Owen responded, his tone measured, yet firm. Sophie quickly donned the clothing that had been laid out for her, jeans and a sweater that fit her impeccably, though she tried not to dwell on how they'd known her exact measurements. Owen escorted her through the sprawling compound, past training grounds where shapeshifters honed their combat skills, shifting between their human and wolf forms. She found herself captivated by their effortless transitions, as if altering their physical state was as natural as breathing. Some engaged in combat as humans, wielding weapons she'd never encountered, while others moved with powerful grace as immense wolves within the practice arena, their actions coordinated with an intelligence that far surpassed mere animal instinct. "Impressive, isn't it?" Owen remarked, noticing her rapt attention. "Most of us begin our training in early childhood. By the time we reach adulthood, the transformation is as instinctive as walking. How many of your kind are there?" "The shifters, I mean." "More than humans realize." "Fewer than we'd prefer," Owen replied cautiously. "We are dispersed globally, organized into packs and territories. Caspian's domain stands as one of the most expansive in North America. They entered a structure that resembled a modern corporate office more than a supernatural stronghold. Conference rooms with glass walls lined a central corridor, and the atmosphere buzzed with the quiet hum of productivity. Through open doorways, Sophie caught glimpses of individuals working at computer terminals, their screens displaying data she couldn't decipher. Caspian awaited her in a corner office that managed to be both professional and undeniably his. The furnishings were of high quality, yet practical, and the walls were adorned with maps marked with unfamiliar symbols. He stood with his back to them, gazing out a window that offered a commanding vista of the compound's defenses. "Thank you, Owen," he said without turning. "Please close the door." Sophie found herself alone with the Alpha for the first time since their rescue. In the daylight, Caspian appeared even more formidable. This was not solely due to his physical stature, but the palpable aura of authority that radiated from him like heat from a flame. Here stood a man accustomed to making life or death decisions, bearing the immense responsibility of hundreds of lives. "How are you feeling?" he inquired, finally turning to face her. Confused, overwhelmed, and profoundly grateful, Sophie answered truthfully. "Your people have been exceptionally kind. They are good individuals. They deserve protection, which is precisely why what I am about to tell you will be difficult to hear." Sophie's mouth went dry. What has happened? Caspian moved to his desk, retrieving a tablet and scrolling through information that caused his jaw to clench with anger. "The individuals who attacked us last night were not random aggressors. They belong to an organization we have been monitoring for several months, humans who apprehend and subject shifters to experimentation. Experimentation of what kind? They seek to replicate our abilities, to create artificial shifters under their control." Caspian's voice was devoid of emotion, yet Sophie could detect the simmering rage beneath the surface. "They have been targeting solitary pack members, particularly those possessing rare gifts." Sophie sank into one of the chairs facing his desk, her legs suddenly feeling weak. "And they believe I possess rare gifts. We suspect they know something about you that you are unaware of yourself," Caspian stated gently. "Sophie, when you tended to that injured German shepherd at the clinic, what did you feel?" "I felt a profound connection to him, as if I could sense his pain and understand his needs." Sophie's brow furrowed in recollection. "But that's not unusual for me." I've always been good with animals. Too good, Caspian affirmed. The manner in which you treated that dog's injury, the remarkable speed of his recovery, and your ability to assist with medical procedures you had never witnessed before. All of these point to capabilities that extend beyond ordinary human capacities. Sophie let out a shaky laugh. Are you suggesting I'm part shifter? Because I'm fairly certain I'd be aware if I could transform into a wolf. Not all supernatural bloodlines manifest as shape-shifting, Caspian explained, moving around the desk to occupy the chair beside her. There are healers, empaths, seers, humans with dormant, supernatural heritage who possess abilities their conscious minds do not recognize. That's impossible. I know my family history. My parents were entirely ordinary people. Caspian's expression grew even more somber. Sophie, we have been investigating your background since that incident at the clinic. Your parents did not perish in a traffic accident. The word struck her with the force of a physical blow. Sophie felt the air rush from her lungs as the world seemed to spin around her. What? They were murdered. By the same organization that targeted us last night. Caspian's voice was gentle but unyielding. Your parents were part of a lineage of healers, humans capable of mending injuries and curing illnesses that would prove fatal to others. They refused to collaborate with these individuals, leading to their demise. Sophie stood abruptly, moving toward the window as her mind reeled. Everything she had believed about her life, her family, and herself was crumbling like sand. You're lying, she whispered. Yet, even as she spoke, the scattered pieces began to fall into place. The innate trust animals had always shown her. The peculiar dreams of her childhood filled with visions of light and healing. The foster families who had deemed her too intense, who had sometimes seemed almost fearful of her. I wish I were, Caspian said quietly. But the evidence is overwhelming. And Sophie, there is more. She turned to face him, dreading what further revelations awaited her. More? The healing abilities you inherited are not merely rare, they are legendary. Your bloodline produces healers perhaps once every century. If these people capture you, they will not simply study you. They will exploit you to create an army of artificial shifters capable of destroying everything we have established. Sophie sank back into her chair, overwhelmed by the sheer magnitude of his words. I don't feel powerful. I don't feel special. I'm just me. You are far more than you comprehend, Caspian stated, and something in his tone compelled her to look up. His eyes were intense, scanning her face as if searching for something specific. Sophie, when we touched at the clinic, did you experience anything unusual? Heat flooded her cheeks as she recalled the electric sensation that had passed between them. Yes, but I attributed it to attraction. It was more than that. Caspian leaned forward, his gaze unwavering. What you felt was the nascent stage of a mate bond. A what? Among shifters, we have destined partners. Upon meeting them, there is an immediate recognition, a connection that transcends the physical or emotional. Caspian's voice deepened. Sophie, you are not merely a healer. You are my mate. The room fell silent, save for the sound of Sophie's ragged breaths. It was all too much. The revelations about her parents, her own abilities, and the profound connection she felt to this dangerous, captivating man. I need some air, she managed to articulate, rising on unsteady legs. Sophie, wait. But she was already moving towards the door, desperate to escape the intensity of his gaze and the implications of everything he had just disclosed. She fled through the corridors, past startled pack members, heading for the exit that would lead her into the forest where she could gather her thoughts. Behind her, she heard Caspian calling her name, but she did not stop. She couldn't. Not when her entire understanding of herself had been shattered and reassembled within the span of a single conversation. The forest welcomed her with cool shadows and the rustling of wind through pine needles. Sophie ran deeper into the woods, following a path that seemed to beckon her instincts. Only when the compound was no longer visible behind her did she finally halt, leaning against the trunk of a massive tree, struggling to regain her breath. Her parents had been murdered. She possessed supernatural abilities. She was purportedly destined to be with a man she had known for less than a week, and somewhere out there, people were hunting her for her very blood. Chapter 6. Blood and Betrayal. Sophie had been traversing the forest for nearly an hour when the tranquilizer dart struck her shoulder. The sharp sting was immediately followed by a spreading numbness that caused her legs to buckle. She managed a single strangled cry before her voice failed completely, her body betraying her as the drugs took hold. Through her blurring vision, she observed figures emerge from the surrounding trees. They moved with military precision, their faces concealed by tactical masks, weapons aimed at her prone form. One of them spoke into a radio with calm professionalism. Package secured, commencing extraction. Sophie attempted to resist as they lifted her, tried to call out for Caspian, but her body no longer responded to her commands. The last image before unconsciousness consumed her was the canopy of pine branches receding as they carried her away from safety. Upon regaining consciousness, Sophie found herself in what appeared to be a medical facility hewn from raw stone. The walls were of rough-hewn rock, yet the equipment was state-of-the-art. Monitoring devices, surgical instruments, and restraints that held her firmly to a metal examination table. Bright lights overhead caused her eyes to water as she attempted to focus on her surroundings. "Ah, you are awake. Excellent." The voice was cultured, refined, with a subtle accent she couldn't quite place. Sophie turned her head to see a man in an expensive suit approaching her table. He was tall and slender, with immaculately styled blonde hair and cold blue eyes that appraised her with scientific interest. "Who are you?" Sophie's voice emerged as a rasp, her throat parched from whatever sedatives they had administered. "My name is Victor Crane," he replied, pulling up a chair beside her table. "And you, my dear, are far more valuable than you realize." "I don't know what you're talking about." Sophie tested the restraints securing her wrists and ankles, but they were designed to restrain far more powerful beings than herself. Victor's smile was patronizing. "Of course you don't. That's the inherent nature of dormant bloodlines. The power exists, whether you are consciously aware of it or not. Tell me, Sophie Carter, do you know what your parents truly were? Despite Caspian's earlier revelations, hearing it from this stranger's lips sent a chill through her veins. My parents were ordinary people. Ordinary people do not possess the genetic markers for supernatural healing abilities, Victor stated, consulting a tablet in his hands. Ordinary people do not carry bloodlines that can trace their ancestry back to the original healers who walked alongside the first shifters centuries ago." He stood and moved to a nearby table, laden with medical instruments. Sophie's heart rate surged as she watched him examine various syringes and scalpels with detached interest. "You see, my dear, your parents made a grave error 16 years ago. When my organization approached them about joining our research program, they refused. They believed their gifts should remain concealed, utilized solely to aid animals and the occasional human who crossed their path. So, you killed them," Sophie whispered, fragments of a horrific mosaic clicking into place. "We removed an obstacle," Victor corrected matter-of-factly, "and we have been observing you ever since, awaiting the manifestation of your abilities. Imagine our surprise when our surveillance indicated you had made contact with Caspian Cross, the most formidable alpha on the West Coast." Victor returned to his chair, leaning forward with predatory intent. "That connection accelerated your awakening, did it not? Being in close proximity to such a powerful shifter, feeling the pull of the mate bond, it triggered abilities that might have remained dormant for years." Sophie remained silent, but her quietude seemed to confirm his suspicions. "The remarkable aspect of healer bloodlines," Victor continued, "is that the abilities function irrespective of the subject's volition. Your touch can mend injuries, hasten recovery, and even revive someone from the brink of death. All we require is your blood, your genetic material, and we can synthesize that power." "To what end?" Sophie demanded, though she dreaded the answer. "To create controllable shifters, naturally. Envision an army of supernatural soldiers, all bound to obey human commanders. No more lurking in the shadows. No more pretending to be the inferior species." Victor's eyes gleamed with fanatical fervor. With your healing abilities integrated into our serum, our artificial shifters will possess near immortality. A door at the far end of the chamber opened, and several individuals in lab coats entered, wheeling equipment that evoked nightmarish imagery. IV drips, extraction devices, machines. Sophie did not recognize, but which exuded an aura of menace. The procedure will be somewhat unpleasant, Victor stated conversationally, but do not worry. We require you to be alive and relatively well for the foreseeable future. Consider yourself a renewable resource. Sophie strained against her restraints with desperate force, but the metal held firm. Caspian will find me. He will dismantle this place. Oh, I am anticipating it, Victor replied with genuine amusement. You see, dear Sophie, you are not merely bait for one alpha. Cross is not the only shifter who has exhibited interest in your unique capabilities. By the time we conclude our work here, every major pack leader on the continent will be attempting your rescue. The implication struck Sophie like a physical blow. You want them to come. I intend for them to walk into the trap we have spent months meticulously preparing. Motion sensors, gas dispensers filled with concentrated tranquilizers, capture protocols specifically designed for supernatural physiology. Victor gestured to the stone walls surrounding them. This facility has been engineered as the ultimate shifter prison. Every alpha who arrives in pursuit of you will become another test subject. One of the laboratory technicians approached, holding a large syringe, its needle glinting under the harsh lights. Sophie's healing abilities may have been dormant to her conscious mind, but her body instinctively recognized the threat. A power she had never known possessed suddenly blazed to life, coursing through her veins like liquid fire. The restraints securing her left wrist snapped. Victor's eyes widened with excitement rather than alarm. Magnificent. Did you witness that? The stress response triggered a significant surge in her cellular energy output. Sophie used her free hand to tear at the remaining restraints, but the technicians were already moving. More syringes appeared, filled with sedatives designed to suppress supernatural abilities. But as the first needle pierced her skin, Sophie's power lashed out instinctively. The technician who had administered the injection suddenly straightened, his eyes clearing as if he had awakened from a long slumber. Confusion replaced the cold professionalism on his face as he surveyed the chamber. "What am I doing here?" he asked, his voice laced with genuine bewilderment. "Where are we?" Victor cursed and snatched a weapon from one of the guards, firing a tranquilizer dart at the disoriented technician. As the man collapsed, Victor turned back to Sophie with renewed interest. "Fascinating. Your healing abilities can not only rectify physical ailments, but also reverse mental conditioning. That technician had been psychologically manipulated for months, and you undid it with a single touch." Sophie had freed her other wrist and was working on the ankle restraints when alarms began to blare throughout the facility. Red lights flashed, and automated voices announced security breaches in multiple sectors. "Right on schedule," Victor remarked, checking his watch. "Your mate possesses excellent timing." Through the facility's intercom system, Sophie could hear the sounds of battle, growls, gunfire, and the distinctive screech of metal being torn apart. Hope surged within her chest as she recognized the ferocity in those wolf howls. Caspian had found her, but Victor seemed unfazed by the chaos. "Guards, initiate Protocol 7. It is time to welcome our guests properly." Gas began hissing from vents in the ceiling. Not the lethal kind, but Sophie could detect the chemical tang of the tranquilizers Victor had mentioned. Whatever concentration they were using was potent enough to affect shifters, meaning it would overwhelm her human physiology within seconds. Sophie freed her ankles and rolled off the examination table just as the chamber door exploded inward. Caspian stood in the doorway in human form, his clothes torn and bloodied, his eyes blazing with protective fury that made him appear more wolf than man. "Get away from her," he snarled, his voice carrying harmonics that hinted at a barely suppressed transformation. "I don't think so," Victor replied calmly, pressing a button on a remote control in his hand. The floor beneath Caspian's feet suddenly gave way, dropping him into a pit lined with silver spikes. Sophie screamed as she watched him fall, but Caspian managed to grasp the edge of the pit. His enhanced strength allowed him to hang suspended above the deadly trap. A silver-lined capture pit, Victor explained conversationally, Painful for shifters to touch, but not immediately fatal. We require him alive for the experiments, after all. Sophie's power surged again, stronger this time, fueled by rage and desperation. She could feel Caspian's pain through their nascent bond. She could sense his strength waning as the silver burned his hands. Without a second thought, she lunged toward Victor, her hands glowing with an energy she was only beginning to comprehend. Sophie, no. Caspian's warning came too late. Victor caught her wrists in a grip that felt like steel cables. His hold was far stronger than any human should possess. As their skin made contact, Sophie realized with horror that her healing power was flowing into him, not harming him. "Thank you, my dear," Victor said, as supernatural energy coursed through his body. "I was wondering how to field test our enhancement serum. Your power will serve as an excellent catalyst." Sophie watched in growing terror as Victor's eyes began to glow with stolen energy, his already formidable strength escalating beyond human limitations. She had just empowered their enemy, transforming him into something far more dangerous than a mere human fanatic. She had inadvertently created a monster. Chapter 7. The Alpha's Claim. Victor's enhanced strength lifted Sophie off the ground as stolen power surged through his system. His eyes blazed with supernatural energy that was not his own, and his grip on her wrists felt like iron manacles. But even as terror flooded her, Sophie could sense something else, a connection that ran deeper than fear or pain. Caspian's presence in her mind, urgent and desperate. "Sophie, listen to me. The bond between us. Use it. My strength is yours." She didn't fully grasp his meaning until she felt it, power flowing not just from her into Victor, but from Caspian into her. The mate bond he had spoken of was more than an emotional connection. It was a conduit, enabling them to share abilities, to become more than the sum of their individual parts. Impossible. Victor snarled as he felt the shift in her energy signature. "You are merely a human with dormant abilities." "No." "I am something else entirely," Sophie declared, her voice resonating with a newfound strength. The energy surging within her had transformed from mere healing power. It now pulsed with the formidable authority of an alpha and the fierce protectiveness of a mate safeguarding their chosen partner. Sophie had never experienced such an potent force coursing through her, her very being remade from victim to something far more formidable. Victor's eyes widened in alarm as he comprehended the unfolding events. "You're bonding right now, in the midst of this battle? You're completing a mate connection that takes most shifter pairs months to achieve." "Some bonds are more profound than others," Caspian ground out, extracting himself from the silver-lined pit. His hands were seared and bleeding from contact with the corrosive metal, yet an unyielding determination propelled him forward. Sophie directed the amplified energy flowing through her into a powerful wave of restorative force. Instead of allowing Victor to seize it, she reversed its course. Every enhanced capability he had siphoned, every artificial alteration his body had undergone, she began to systematically unravel. Victor shrieked as his stolen strength turned against him. The very enhancements that had elevated him to superhuman status now became liabilities, as Sophie's power identified them as foreign elements to be expelled. His grip on her wrists faltered as his body convulsed, struggling to contain the warring energies within his cells. "Eliminate them both," Victor managed to command his remaining guards. But Caspian was already in motion, his injuries disregarded in the face of a lethal threat to his mate. He transformed mid-air, his human form dissolving into the colossal black wolf that had initially rescued Sophie from the parking lot. His jaws clamped down on the nearest guard's throat, while his claws tore through tactical armor designed to withstand bullets but not supernatural ferocity. Sophie felt every facet of the conflict through their deepening connection. Caspian's pain became her own, but so too did his strength, his swiftness, and the predatory instincts honed by years of leadership. She had never engaged in combat before, but now she moved with borrowed expertise, evading attacks and retaliating with a precision that astonished her adversaries. More guards flooded the chamber, only to confront opponents who were no longer merely human or shifter. Sophie and Caspian fought as a unified pair, anticipating each other's actions, compensating for weaknesses, and magnifying strengths through their psychic link. "This is impossible," Victor gasped, struggling to maintain control as Sophie's power continued to dismantle his enhancements. "Mate bonds don't activate this rapidly. The process requires time, preparation, ritual." "You are mistaken," Sophie countered, deftly evading a tranquilizer dart and redirecting its path into one of Victor's own men. "Some connections transcend your understanding of how things operate." Through the facility's loudspeakers, she detected the conflict spreading. Caspian's pack had arrived in full force, dismantling Victor's meticulously laid trap with coordinated efficiency. The incapacitating gas intended for shifters was being neutralized by pack members possessing specialized abilities. Meanwhile, the silver-lined containment pits were being circumvented by wolves who had undergone years of training for precisely such rescue missions. But Victor had not yet surrendered. Even as Sophie's power stripped away his pilfered abilities, he withdrew a final weapon from his coat, a syringe filled with a liquid that emitted an unnatural luminescence. "If I cannot control you," he snarled, "then I shall ensure no one benefits from your capabilities." The needle was aimed directly at Sophie's heart, designed to inject a toxin that would invert her healing gifts into their antithesis, a power capable of inflicting death rather than sustaining life. However, Caspian's wolf form intercepted the strike. Victor's syringe pierced fur and muscle, missing its intended target. Sophie felt the poison entering Caspian's bloodstream through their bond, felt his system begin to falter as the toxin assailed his augmented physiology. Yet she also sensed something else, an opportunity. The mate bond operated reciprocally. If she could share his strength, she could also share his burden. Sophie placed her hands upon Caspian's wolf form, channeling not only healing energy, but her very life force into him. The toxin that would have claimed his life within minutes became something she could confront. Her power adapted specifically to purge foreign substances from living organisms, but the exertion demanded everything she possessed. Sophie felt her own vitality draining as she drew Victor's poison into herself, utilizing her body as a conduit to purify what threatened her mate. The chamber around them began to waver as her consciousness started to recede. "No." Caspian's voice resonated in her mind, filled with fierce denial. "Sophie, desist. You will perish." "Better me than you," she managed to project back, though coherent thought was becoming increasingly elusive. "Unacceptable." Caspian's human form rematerialized as he shifted back, his hands covering hers where they pressed against his chest. "We do this together, or not at all." Their combined resolve focused the poison into a concentrated mass that Sophie's power could isolate and annihilate. Rather than attempting to process the toxin independently, they shared the burden, the mate bond enabling them to divide what would have been fatal to either one individually. Victor watched in escalating horror as his ultimate weapon was systematically rendered inert. This is not how it works. Mate bonds are emotional connections, not shared power sources. That reveals how little you truly comprehend about shifters. Owen's voice boomed from the chamber entrance as Caspian's brother arrived with reinforcements. True mate bonds represent the rarest and most potent connections in our world. They forge partnerships that transcend individual limitations. The remaining guards surrendered as pack members filled the chamber, their coordinated assault having completely overwhelmed Victor's facility. Sophie, however, barely registered their arrival. Her focus was entirely on the man whose life she had just preserved, and who, in turn, had saved hers. "The bond is complete," Caspian stated softly, his gaze locking with hers with an intensity that stole her breath. "Sophie, do you grasp the implications?" She nodded, feeling the connection between them as palpably as her own heartbeat. "It signifies that we are partners in every respect." "This means you are the Luna of the Western Territories," Owen announced with a broad grin. "Alpha female for every shifter pack from here to the Pacific Ocean. I trust you are prepared for considerable responsibility." Sophie surveyed the chamber, observing the vanquished facility, the pack members regarding her with respect and anticipation, and Caspian, whose existence was now irrevocably intertwined with hers in ways she was only beginning to comprehend. Just 24 hours prior, she had been a veterinary student, preoccupied with exam scores. Now she was something she had never conceived possible, the mate of the most powerful alpha on the continent, possessing abilities capable of healing or destruction, depending on her choices. "I am ready," she declared, surprised by the genuine conviction in her words. Victor emitted a bitter laugh from where he lay, restrained by Owen's men. "You have no comprehension of what you have just pledged yourself to. The human world will not tolerate your existence once they discover your true nature. They will pursue you, dissect you, attempt to replicate what makes you extraordinary." "Let them try," Sophie responded, her voice imbued with an authority she had never previously possessed. "They will discover that some things cannot be stolen or imitated." She met Caspian's gaze, mirroring the unwavering determination reflected in his eyes. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they would confront them in unison. The frightened woman who had sought refuge in the clinic less than a week ago was no more, supplanted by someone who understood her place within a grander design. The mate bond thrummed between them, potent and unbreakable, promising a future neither could have envisioned alone. Chapter 8. Forever Bound. 6 months had elapsed since the confrontation at Victor's facility, and Sophie was still adapting to the reality of her irrevocably altered life. She stood before the expansive floor-to-ceiling windows of her new office at Ravens Ridge, observing the pack members, engaged in their evening routines within the compound below. Children frolicked in the courtyard, while their parents concluded their work shifts and patrol teams prepared for their nightly sweeps through the surrounding forest. "Second thoughts?" Caspian's voice, warm with affection and understanding, emanated from behind her. Sophie turned to see her mate leaning against the doorframe, still attired in the formal suit he had worn for their video conference with the European pack leaders earlier that day. Even after months of being bonded, the sight of him still sent a thrill through her. "Never," she replied, moving into his embrace with the effortless familiarity of established intimacy. "I was merely contemplating how profoundly different everything has become." "Different how?" Caspian inquired, his hands finding her waist as he drew her closer. 6 months ago, the most significant decision I faced was selecting which textbook to study. Now," Sophie laughed, gesturing toward the papers scattered across her desk, "I am reviewing territorial accords and healing protocols for 12 distinct pack communities." The transition from veterinary student to Luna had been arduous, yet profoundly rewarding. Sophie's exceptional healing abilities had revolutionized medical care throughout Caspian's territory, enabling her to establish treatment centers that served both shifters and the human populations, unknowingly bordering their lands. "Any regrets?" Caspian asked, though his tone implied he already knew the answer. "Only that it required a life-or-death ordeal for us to find each other," Sophie responded, reaching up to adjust his tie. "Though I suppose that is fitting for us." Their relationship had steadily deepened since the completion of the mate bond, but it had necessitated adjustments from both individuals. Caspian had learned to share the solitude inherent in leadership, while Sophie had grown into an authority she had never anticipated wielding. The young woman who had once worried about paying rent was now responsible for the well-being of thousands. A knock at the office door interrupted their moment. Luna entered, carrying a tablet and wearing an expression that signaled significant news. "Apologies for the interruption," she said with a grin that suggested she wasn't particularly apologetic. "But Dr. Martinez is here for your monthly evaluation, Sophie, and Owen wishes to brief you both on the new territorial applications from the Midwest packs." Sophie sighed, stepping away from Caspian's embrace. The glamorous life of supernatural leadership. "Dr. Martinez first," Caspian decided. "The territorial discussions can await until after we ascertain your progress." Dr. Martinez was the pack's senior medical officer, a woman whose shifting abilities had manifested as heightened diagnostic senses rather than the typical wolf form. She had been meticulously monitoring Sophie's development as a healer, documenting abilities that continued to evolve at an unprecedented pace. "How are you feeling?" Dr. Martinez inquired, as she set up her monitoring equipment in the medical bay adjacent to Sophie's office. "Strong. Better than I ever have, actually," Sophie replied honestly. "The connection with Caspian has stabilized everything. My abilities no longer feel erratic or unpredictable." "That is consistent with what we are observing in the data," Dr. Martinez confirmed, reviewing readings that tracked Sophie's energy output and healing capacity. "Your power levels have increased by nearly 30% since the bonding ceremony, but more importantly, your control has improved dramatically." The formal claiming ceremony had taken place 3 weeks after the rescue, a private ritual witnessed only by pack leadership and Sophie's chosen family within the community. Unlike human weddings, shifter bonding ceremonies emphasize the spiritual and psychic connection between mates, forging legal and mystical ties that bound them in ways human matrimony could not achieve. "Any unusual symptoms?" Dr. Ace Martinez continued her examination, collecting blood samples that would reveal far more than any human medical test could detect. "Actually, yes," Sophie admitted, glancing at Caspian. "I've been experiencing vivid dreams lately, not nightmares, but incredibly detailed visions of places I've never visited, people I've never encountered, and at times I awaken with knowledge I shouldn't possess." Dr. Martinez paused her work, exchanging a significant look with Caspian. "What nature of knowledge?" "Yesterday, I knew a pack member in Oregon was injured before Owen received the emergency call," Sophie explained. "Last week, I woke up with intricate details about healing techniques that are not found in any textbook I have studied." "Ancestral memory," Dr. Martinez declared with palpable excitement. "Your healer bloodline is connecting you to the accumulated knowledge of previous generations. It is exceedingly rare, even among documented healers." "Is it dangerous?" Caspian questioned, his protective instincts immediately on high alert. "Not dangerous, but significant," Dr. Martinez replied. "Sophie, you are evolving into something far beyond our initial expectations. The confluence of your innate abilities, the mate bond enhancement, and now ancestral memory access makes you arguably the most potent healer born in centuries." The implications hung heavy in the air. Power of such magnitude carried responsibility and risk in equal measure. "There is something else," Sophie stated quietly. "I believe I might be pregnant." The words dropped into the sudden silence like an explosive device. Caspian became utterly still beside her, his expression shifting through surprise, elation, and protective concern. "How long have you suspected?" Dr. Martinez asked, her professional demeanor struggling to conceal evident excitement. "A few weeks. The symptoms are subtle, but combined with the enhanced abilities and the peculiar dreams." Sophie shrugged. "It feels different from anything I have experienced before." Dr. Martinez immediately initiated further tests, her equipment humming with activity as it analyzed samples that would either confirm or deny Sophie's suspicions. The moment felt suspended in time, laden with the weight of possibilities that would once again reshape everything. "Congratulations," Dr. Martinez finally announced with a wide smile. "You are most certainly pregnant." "Approximately 8 weeks along, based on the hormone levels and energy signatures I am detecting," Sophie confirmed. She felt Caspian's arms encircle her from behind, his joy and wonder flooding through their bond with overwhelming intensity. A child, their child, the first offspring of a true healer and an alpha king in documented shifter history. "What does this signify?" Sophie inquired, though she suspected the answer would be complex. "It means your child will be unique," Dr. Martinez responded carefully. "The offspring of such potent bloodlines has never been recorded. We are venturing into uncharted territory, but the baby will be healthy." "Healthy?" Caspian asked, his voice taut with concern. "As far as I can ascertain, perfectly healthy," Dr. Martinez assured them. "But Sophie, your abilities will likely continue to evolve throughout the pregnancy. We will need to monitor you closely." Later that evening, Sophie and Caspian strolled through the forest surrounding Raven's Ridge, following pathways they had traversed countless times during their bonding period. The woods felt different now, not merely familiar, but intrinsically home. "Are you frightened?" Sophie inquired, her hand resting protectively over her still flat stomach. "Terrified?" Caspian admitted with his characteristic honesty. "I have led packs through wars and territorial disputes, but the prospect of being responsible for a child who might inherit both our abilities—" He shook his head. "That is a level of responsibility I never imagined." "We will navigate it together," Sophie declared, echoing words he had spoken to her during their initial weeks at the compound. "That is what mates do." They paused at their favorite overlook, where the valley unfurled below, dotted with the lights of the compound. Somewhere in the distance, wolves offered their evening songs to the ascending moon. "Do you ever miss your former life?" Caspian asked. Sophie considered the question with gravity. "I miss the simplicity at times. But that woman who fretted over exam grades and rent payments was living only half a life. She had no awareness of her capabilities. She did not comprehend her place in the world." "And now you do," he stated. "Now I know that some individuals are destined for extraordinary feats," Sophie replied, turning to face him. "I was consumed by terror that night in the clinic when you entered. But a part of me recognized you even then. Recognized home." Caspian kissed her with the passion and tenderness that had defined their relationship from its inception, a perfect synthesis of gentle devotion and fierce protection. Through their bond, Sophie felt his absolute commitment to their shared future, his unwavering resolve to forge a world where their child could mature in safety and strength. "I love you," he whispered against her lips, words carrying the weight of eternity. "I love you too," Sophie responded, her hand finding the business card she still kept in her pocket, a tangible reminder of the wrong number that had precipitated everything right in her life. Above them, the full moon cast a silvery luminescence across the forest, illuminating the path that had brought them together and would guide them through whatever challenges lay ahead. They were no longer merely individuals striving to survive in a complex world. They were mates, partners, leaders of a community that looked to them for protection and guidance. And soon, they would be parents to a child who would inherit abilities capable of reshaping the relationship between the human and shifter realms. Whatever transpired next, they would face it together, bound by love and destiny in equal measure. The future stretched before them, radiant with possibility and anchored by the unbreakable connection forged in crisis and solidified by choice. Sophie Carter, the apprehensive veterinary student, had vanished forever. In her place stood Sophie Cross, Luna, healer and expectant mother, poised for whatever extraordinary adventures awaited.